Our guest today on Caribbeana is Mr. David Abdullah. David is the head of the MSJ, Movement for Social Justice in Trinidad. And he's also been a very welcome guest on here with us on Caribbeana. Welcome, David. Nice to see you, man.
Greetings. Thanks, Vaughn, for having me once again on your fantastic program, Caribbeana. Great to be with you.
Yes. Well, the first thing, let's talk a bit about the elections in Trinidad and Tobago, which recently occurred. Um, and of course, your MSJ did not participate in. Give me your synopsis of it. I mean, did you have a sense, a perception that would have been the outcome with the UNC beating the PNM?
Yes, so the elections were 2 Mondays ago on the 28th of April. And there was only one poll prior to the elections, about a week before, which did indicate that the UNC was ahead. This was done by Professor Hamid Ghani for the Trinidad Guardian.
Right.
But that was the only poll. Now, even though he indicated that the UNC had more support in the marginal constituencies, he himself said it was close to call. And so my own kind of guesstimate was that it could have been 21-20 either way, or if the momentum was with the UNC could have gotten 24 or 25 seats. In fact, they got 26, and the PNM also lost the 2 seats in Tobago. Now, what the results in terms of the voter turnout says is quite significant. Firstly, there was a very low voter turnout, 54%, which was the second lowest after the no vote campaign of 1971.
Right.
Remember, after the Black Power, February 26, 1970 movement, A&R Robinson left the PNM. He formed the ACDC political party, and they joined with NJAC and the DLP, the trade unions and so on, for a no vote campaign in 71, because they wanted the removal of the voting machines and they wanted the reduction in the voting age from 21 to 18. Eric Williams, Prime Minister, didn't agree to that, and so there was a no vote campaign, and the turnout was about 30%, of which the PNM got about 28% of the votes. So, 28% of the electorate, and won all 36 seats. So this election, 54% was the lowest ever, and I mean, there were some constituencies, particularly the PNM constituencies, where the voter turnout was 32%, 34%, in places like Laventille East, Laventille West, or the Spain South. Even the Diego Martin seats was like 40, 42%. And the PNM lost 100,000 votes between 2020 and now. When I say lost, 100,000 fewer people voted for the PNM in this election. They got about 220-something thousand votes compared to 2020, where they got 320-odd thousand. So that huge decline of PNM voters also accounted for two things. One, it accounted for the low voter turnout significantly, but it also accounted for the PNM losing seats, because in a number of the constituencies, their vote count dropped by 2,000, 2,500 votes. The UNC vote count may not have gone up that significantly, but the drop in the PNM vote count by 2,000, 2,005 meant that the UNC was able to win a lot of seats and came close to winning a number of others. There were 3 seats, including San Fernando East, which has been held by the Manning family since 1971. Patrick Manning, and then his son Brian now is the MP for that area. He only won that seat by about 600 votes. Normally the Mannings win that seat, or the PNM wins that seat by 3,000-4,000 votes. That is an indication of the discontent, massive discontent with the PNM. By people who traditionally would have supported the party.
Do you think they will eventually overcome this?
Well, there are a lot of internal wranglings. You remember that when Dr. Rowley, then Prime Minister, decided that he was going to step down as Prime Minister early this year, the members of the PNM Parliamentary Caucus were gathered in Tobago for a retreat, and they did supposedly a secret ballot among the elected members of the House of Representatives, PNM elected members, which totaled 21 at the time, because sadly, Mrs. Morris Julian died last year, so her seat was vacant. So
Yeah.
of the 21 MPs that the PNM had, Dr. Rowley didn't vote, and it turned out to be 9 persons voting for Penelope Beckles and 11 for Stuart Young,
Right.
which therefore suggested within the cabinet there was a deep division.
Yeah.
And so Stuart Young then became prime minister, and then called the elections the day after he was sworn in as prime minister, and the cabinet was sworn in.
Uh-huh.
So he had no time to establish his own persona. So he was seen to be really Dr. Rowley Part 2 in that sense, Mark 2, because he had worked so closely with Dr. Rowley. Right. So they're still wrangling because they had elections at the level of the General Council last week to elect a party chairman because Stuart Young resigned as party chair. And in that election, Nyan Gatsby-Dolly, who was a former Minister of Education, she's still a member of Parliament, she won that vote 60 to 58. Right. She defeated the Mayor of Port of Spain, Chinua Alain, who happens to be the nephew of the late Patrick Manning. Right. So there clearly is deep division within the PNM, and you're seeing various commentaries coming out by some people known, some people anonymous, and so on. Yeah. So it's left to be seen whether they can recover or when they'll recover. They decided to elect Mrs. Penelope Beckles Robinson as the leader of the opposition. Right. So she has been sworn in as the leader of the opposition. But again, that was not an initial unanimous position by the 13 members of the PNM who won their seats on the 28th of April. She initially had a letter signed by 6 persons, and of those 13, and then she acknowledged and said yes, she accepts the position. She would accept the position. So she was the 7th signature out of 13, right. Which meant that 6 people initially of those MPs did not sign on for her to be leader of the opposition. Right. But that eventually became unanimous. So there are deep divisions within the PNM.
Yes, yes. There was something that came out. I was looking where Manning Brian was talking about one vote for casting one vote or something like that.
When Dr. Rowley took over the leadership of the PNM, he did succeed in having the party amend the constitution to provide for one member, one vote. But they say one man, but it's really one member, one vote. Right. Elections for the leadership of the party. Brian Manning, after the election defeat, suggested that the constitution be amended to reverse that decision and once again have the leadership elected by the delegates at a party convention, right. Which is what it was prior to about 15 years ago. Right. But I don't think that they will revert to the delegate vote system to elect the leadership. I think it will remain as a member's vote.
Right.
Well, and in fact, yesterday, the executive of the PNM met and decided that they would recommend to the General Council, and this is what I read in the papers this morning, that the election should be held before the end of June, which is very short time for candidate to put in place machinery for an election and all of that. Right. But I think that is because they're trying to get the leadership elections out of the way, and therefore perhaps have a unified team to rebuild the party. Right. That may be what it is. I can't say.
Right. Now, with the structure of the Prime Minister's, Kamala's makeup of her party, do you see it as a successful structure, an effort to combine, give a mixed body of people representing the ministry, the ministers of government?
It is a large cabinet in the first place because having won 26 seats, she felt it necessary to have as many of them as possible holding some position in the executive, either as a full minister or a junior minister, that is a minister in the ministry of, or as a parliamentary secretary. And then, of course, a number of ministers and so on have also come via the Senate. So it is a large cabinet and a larger executive. Now, the portfolios or the ministerial positions she has reverted to some of the structure that she had in the People's Partnership. So, for example, in the People's Partnership, there was an Attorney General, and then separate from that, there was a Minister of Legal Affairs, and separate from that, there was a Minister of Justice. She has come back with that structure again, whereas the PNM simply had Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs. She has split the Ministry of Works into a Ministry of Works and Infrastructure and then a Ministry of Transportation, which is what she also had in the partnership period, 2010, 2015. And there are a number of other things like that that have been divided, if you wish, as ministries. The Ministry of Education has once again been split into two: Ministry of Tertiary Education and Ministry of Education, which that one I think makes sense because tertiary education is quite separate and apart from early childhood, primary, secondary school education, and that was a huge ministry. So as a result of that splitting of ministries, the Ministry of National Security, which we have known for a long time, in your day, way back when, it used to be the Ministry of Home Affairs. Right. But then that, even in William's days, it became Minister of National Security. And that has now been split into two. I don't know if I like the name because it's a kind of copycat from the US. So there's a Minister of Homeland Security and a Minister of Defense. Now, how these ministries work in terms of avoiding what is the culture of our government structure in Trinidad and Tobago for years, where ministries operate in silos. So one ministry is doing something, another ministry is doing something that is connected to or related to that, but they're not talking, they're unaware of what each other is planning. So there's a duplication.
Right.
Of if that, sorry, somebody was calling me just now. So yes, let me just give me 1 second, Vaughn. Let me just put a do not disturb on this phone.
All right. Yes, we are talking with David Abdullah.
Right. Okay. So.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So I'm back here. Sorry. Yes. So so it's going to be very important for the efficient or more efficient delivery of government services for there to be good collaboration across ministries to avoid the silo effect, especially with such a large cabinet and a number of ministries having divided responsibilities. Now, I do think, because there were comments by the Minister of Homeland Security, Roger Alexander, former Senior Superintendent of Police, that he's still waiting on some information about the specific areas of his ministerial responsibility as distinct from what the Minister of Defense will be responsible for. So those things take some time, and it obviously will therefore slow things down a little bit, but we shall see how it works over the long term. Now, what was important and interesting was that there were two constituencies that the PNM had not lost since 1986, when the NAR swept the elections 33-3 in that historic victory by A.N.R. Robinson, the NAR. And those two constituencies in the south, Point Forte and Labre. Now, in this election, both of those were lost by the PNM. And the two candidates who contested those seats, while they went up as UNC, with a UNC symbol, they were in fact the chosen representatives by the trade unions. So they represent the trade unions within what is called the coalition of interest. Ernesto Kiza, who himself was an oil worker, used to work at Trinma, and was actually a member of the MSA's executive up until February, but had to resign in order to be able to contest for the UNC under the coalition of interest. So he won the Point Fortin seat, and Clyde Elder, who was also a member of our party, who had to also resign to contest that under the UNC symbol, he won the Labre seat. Now, they have been appointed as junior ministers, but members of the cabinet nevertheless. Kiza in the Ministry of Energy, and Clyde Elder, who was the former Secretary General of the Communication Workers Union and a former TSTT worker in the Ministry of Public Utilities. So those were two kind of strategic appointments, which will, we think, if the trade unions can leverage it well, can see a number of positives coming out. Because there is another former trade unionist, Leroy Batiste, who's now former president of the Public Services Association, who's now Minister of Labor.
Right.
So there's going to be an interesting dynamic, because politics, of course, is about interests and competing, if not conflicting interests, right?
Right.
So you have the workers' interests in there, but you have other interests in the UNC, and so it is going to be necessary for the trade union movement outside of the parliament, outside of the cabinet, to be vigilant and to keep the issues on the front burner in terms of major labor legislation reform, settlement of outstanding negotiations, and other matters that affect workers.
Right. Well, this certainly takes me. I was going to ask you about where do you see MSJ playing in all of this as you advance, as we can continue the process.
Yes, and as you correctly said at the start of the program, Vaughn, we did not contest the elections. We took that decision. Well, we were halfway thinking that late last year, but we formally took that decision early this year, and we made it public. I think around the 14th of January, well before there was a suggestion of an early election date. So it was important that for us to build, we have not had a chance to really build the party in the way we need to build it, to be able to make a serious challenge for a parliamentary seat or seats. And so the elections being over, we now have a bit of a stretch run to, a couple of years to be able to do the work on the ground, to ramp up our social media and so on. We did make some interventions prior to the elections. We obviously issued some statements prior to elections. One important one was make an analysis of politics and of the performance of the PNM in its 9.5 years of being in office. And we concluded by saying the PNM should not get another term. They should not be allowed to win the elections. And we described that carefully on the basis of evidence of the damage that they did to the economy, and more particularly to the lives of ordinary people, to workers and so on, and the closure of Petrotrin, etc. Then I did a statement on Petrotrin, an hour and 10 minutes, which went up on YouTube afterwards. It was on one of the television stations just before the elections. And it's gotten close to 50,000, if not 50,000 views. So a lot of people actually saw the real story of Petrotrin. Right. So we are continuing with our Tuesday Talk programs, and we have gotten some new people on the leadership team. And this weekend coming, we'll be meeting at our activist level, the first time we have met since the elections. And we will be, restating the plans that we had laid out in January, but which we had to put on hold because of the election campaign. Mm-hmm. We weren't involved, but we had to, political activity for us came to, slow down. So we're going to continue to be active and to build. And I certainly think there's an important role for progressive politics in the country, because we are the ones who could speak on major international issues and on national issues from the standpoint of the working people, the working classes, and defending their interests. And we will continue to do that. And we will continue to build. I think it's going to be very exciting for us in the next couple of years, in terms as we build our membership, as we expand our base of activity and so on, and also as we engage in succession planning. Right. Because you and I are not getting any younger.
I'm telling you. Yes. Well, listen, David, thank you, man. It's nice talking to you again, and we will stay in touch and continue the work, the good work that you're doing. Yeah, continue.
Thanks, Ron. And I will send you information about the activities in Grenada that's coming up in the next few days to honor the life and legacy of Louise Langdon Little, who was the mother of Malcolm X.
Malcolm X, right.
So Malcolm's mother was born in Grenada and lived her early life in Grenada before migrating to the US. And so there's a whole delegation that's been organized this week by the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, led by Professor Ron Daniels, who I'm sure you know, and to begin the process of setting up a proper museum or shrine and monument at the location where she lived in her village. And so I will be putting up some stuff on social media about those events, so you could follow it from there.
Definitely. You take care, David. All right?
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for having me.
Okay. I've been speaking with David Abdullah, the head of the MSJ, the Movement for social justice. This is Von Martin. Caribbeana continues.